So I'm joined today by my good friend Joe, who I have had the pleasure of meeting most recently in Bett in London. Don't know if we'll get that opportunity in 2021. I think it's looking unlikely, but yeah, I mean, Joe's a great guy to have a chat with. I'm sure many of you have met Joe previously. If he's been, you know, he's talking, you've got so many interests and elements that you're involved in and projects that you're working on. So it's a real pleasure for me to have you with me today, Joe. And thank you so much for giving up some time to have a chat about your experiences during lockdown and kind of looking forward to what the future might be for, returning to school and education in general. So Joe, if you don't mind, I'd really like to get started just by, a bit of an introduction and a little bit of a background to kind of how you got into education and what you're up to and what your main, what you're all about really.
Okay, well, good morning, and thanks for the invitation, Martin, for the chat. It's great to chat to like-minded educators. So my name's Joe Moretti, ADE class 2005. Got into education or started teaching in 1982.
Okay.
Computers were just kind of rearing their head for ZX81, ZX Spectrum, but you wouldn't be old enough to remember that. But I'm primary trained, and I just fell into that. Music specialist, as you know. I did about 5-6 years teaching in primary and moved into secondary. I did 6 or 7 years in secondary as a music specialist, purely because I wanted the challenge of older students and instrumentally wanting to do larger choirs, older choirs, all that kind of stuff. And in England, we have FE, further education, and because of my growing interest in music technology was evolving a lot through the 80s. We all, the 80s and computers and sequencers and synthesizers particularly, that was a really exciting time. So that kind of permeated into my teaching. And I stayed in further education for about 8.5 years, actually. And through that, especially through the Apple piece of software called Logic, which Apple had bought, which became Garageband. And funny enough, it became Garageband in 2005, the year I became an ADE. As a Logic specialist, I ended up being recruited by University, lecturing on some core degrees, and as a Logic specialist, which is how I met Apple. Okay. And a guy called Julian Coltis, who was also became an AD. He left Apple and became an AD, and said, "You really need to be an ADE." And ADs at that point, Apple Distinguished Educator, for anybody who's watching it who doesn't know what one is. We were very much either a subject specialist or just a very passionate user in some sort of education context. And he saw what I was doing, and he said, this is in 2004, "You should come to this show called Bett." And the university got excited and said, "Oh wow, Apple wants you." And it was a very different world then. There was no iPad, there was no iPhone.
Yeah. There
was the white MacBooks, I think. Certainly that was starting to happen. And if a school had a white MacBook, it was unusual. I mean, everybody's like, "Wow, the school's got a Mac." And then iLife and iWork started. I became an ADE, and it completely, utterly changed my world, my education world, everything. Yeah. There were far fewer ADEs. There was a sort of core of us, Oscar Stringer, David Bourne, myself, and we got so busy with, we literally paralleled the explosion of Apple, which was a cult, I guess, more at the time, at that time for the last, I'd say, 15 years. Very different world.
Yeah, very different. And do you think that's because of changes in Apple's approach to education, the devices they've released, or is it bigger than that? Is it education that's changed, or?
I think there were a lot of factors that just, there was a synchronicity of us as kind of passionate users. Steve Jobs and his team very much at that time were really into seeing where it would go in education. There's a head of education, people that are still there, whose names you're not allowed to mention. But there was also a team of people that I worked with. They're no longer at Apple, actually, like Lara, David Kilding, or Duncan Kemp. They were people that were actually, I think what was really exciting about their leadership, or at least working with them, they were people that would say, well, we're thinking of doing this event, and we kind of explored it. Now, because Apple is so huge, and there's so many ADs, there's almost a kind of, we'll do this, and this is the way it will be done. And of course, the iPad and the whole everyone can create has evolved so much into a program. But we were given so much space to experiment with stuff, and people were producing third-party stuff, like the microscopes we'd connect via wireless to an iPad, and next minute you were looking at the eye of a bee massively on an iPad that was, for the first time, airplayed to a screen. And people were losing their minds that we were getting 100, 150, 200 people. I did an event in Denmark. We had 200 people. And they were doing things like having a kind of DJ guy who had been using Garageband with myself on guitar. Or we were doing things like having 40 Parrot drones flying around because everyone can code started. All of that kind of frontier stuff was so exciting. You just didn't know what was going to come next, really.
And I don't know, at the moment we sit here and I kind of think, you hear things like those and you kind of accept them as almost being the norm now, and you can't imagine in 15 years time as looking back at today and thinking the same thing, or thinking, right, actually what, I can't imagine anything that's going to blow my mind. You kind of think, oh, we've done it all and we've got what we need, and I'm sure there'll be something they'll find that they can explore. But it's quite amazing, that journey, and it's quite scary to think what might come next.
Well, I was thinking back on, obviously we were emailing each other. I was thinking back to the early days of the iPad. We didn't even have OpenIn. OpenIn was one of the biggest advances. It was one of the things that really separated it from Android massively. That if I literally want to give this to someone, I would do that, select AirDrop, and it would go. We were using WebDAV in the early days of the iPad, and IT guys, tech guys, etc., were making teachers jump through quite convoluted hoops to save their work, get it off the iPad. But in a very short space of time, people like Shobi, they really were on the ball, because I remember Colin Bram. We were so closely aligned, that group of ADEs, that Colin would ring you, or you'd have a call, and he said, "We've done OpenIn." And next minute, it was speaking to everything, 365, iCloud, you name it. It was there in a menu. Quite incredible. Book Creator came out with, I think, iPad 2, because I was talking to Dan at Book Creator just recently, and it had pictures and text.
That was it.
Nothing else.
And it's quite amazing. I mean, I was just looking at, because we used to be really, well, we still are really heavy users of Book Creator, and I'm kind of, still love Book Creator, but I'm wanting to add a bit more variety to our uses next year, and looking at ways that our slightly older children can maybe move more of the work that we're doing previously in Book Creator into Pages, with the developments that have come in Pages recently. And Book Creator seems to be very focused at the moment on their Chrome work and the work they're doing on Chrome. And I was saying, I wish they would revisit Book Creator again and bring some new things to Book Creator. Actually, I then looked at it realistically and thought, well, actually, they've added so much in the last 2 years, maybe, with the predictive drawings and the additional tools. Actually, what else do I need them to? What else do I need them to do with Book Creator? There isn't very much. So it's definitely still got its place, but it's trying to get that progression from Book Creator into Pages, and that variety that we're looking at next year.
Well, the changes in Pages, in particular Pages and Keynote, with the drawing tools and the audio, are just fantastic. And I use a lot of Pages into EPUB.
Yeah.
I'm a big EPUB user because I think the interactive elements that Pages becoming an EPUB really offers me at different levels. So for a secondary users who quite often would look down on Book Creator.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I can see why, but actually Andrew Jewell, his daughter, when she was doing her hires, she produced a portfolio of work in Book Creator. And it was like, you get out what you put in. And that, for a piece of work from a 17, 18-year-old, just blew my mind. It was like, wow, that's Book Creator. Of course, we can do all of that now in Pages. But as I was going to say with EPUB, you've got the things like highlighting, note-taking, bookmarks, etc., that make it a successful pedagogical tool at that higher age range. Most definitely. That was always a big thing, actually, from the very, very early days. EPUB is seen as quite new, but actually, we had it on the iPod Touches. Do you remember those?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, going right back to that, we were creating EPUBs.
Yeah.
I remember doing some workshops on it, and it was there already. The idea of a template to scaffold the creation of a great piece of content was there very early on.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how a lot of the theory doesn't change, but the packaging, develops and matures. So yeah, I mean, it's always fascinating having a conversation with you, Joe, because you never quite know what you're going to touch on, and there's just a wealth of knowledge and understanding there. So really,
I would like to say actually a really important point, Martin. Actually, it was something that I had a conversation. Well, we're still talking with various either Apple people or people who've moved on from Apple, and I did a tweet recently that it was about the focus has always been with Apple that whilst the tools are great and very exciting, like if you need to take the early days of iMovie, we were using it to pedagogical outcomes. And I'm not saying you can't have fun. I mean, crumbs, I love gadgets and whatever, but the focus was always that you could identify what the learning was and what the learning progression was going to be. And I think in education, since I've been in education, which is almost 40 years, I've seen far too much tech that has possibilities, but actually that hasn't been thought through well enough.
Absolutely.
That's my biggest bugbear about education is always struggling for investment, being funded properly. So we can't afford to make mistakes on a large scale, which I've seen many times without mentioning particular products, but we know what they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it always comes back to that question of why, why are we doing this? And if we can't answer that question, then, let's not do it. And I think in an environment where, we're rolling out deployments where either schools are investing huge sums of money or we're asking parents to support that investment, they've got every right to ask us, why are you doing this as well? And look for, as you say, that pedagogical evidence of why we need these devices. And there are things that I look at and you very quickly can see how and why that's going to be of benefit. And there are other things you look at and you think, actually, it looks lovely and we can sell it and it might look wonderful in an open day event and, it's all shiny, but actually, why are we doing it? And what are our people?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Getting before.
You just reminded me of something, Martin, actually, which is the early days of the iPad. There were two things. One is that I actually took my iPad one or two to the theatre with me. It was so sad, pathetic, but nobody'd seen one. It literally got passed around the theatre. The point I'm making about that anecdote was at that time, as iPads went into the school, the kids lost their minds. Because it was this thing. Now we have the position that we're having to re-educate that people have Androids, they have iPads at home, but it doesn't connect with a pedagogical tool. It's an entertainment tool or whatever. So we're constantly having to re-educate parents and students because it's I'm Fortnite. I'm a gamer. I'm doing this with it. They don't know that this world exists for it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's something that certainly when I look at what we've done I'm quite proud of the fact that I think our kids, kids are using these regularly. They do see them as a very different tool, it's trying to make sure that parents see that. 'Cause I think quite often parents do miss that. But yeah, no, really looking forward to this conversation about lockdown as well. So obviously, we've spent the last 3 months or so away from schools and away from exhibition halls. How has that been for you, Joe? How have you coped with lockdown and not being able to do things in the way that we would normally do things? How's that been for you?
Well, I'm very lucky. I live in Somerset, not far from Glastonbury, where there is no festival. So I do a lot of traveling, as you know. I regularly visit about 10 countries with work, with working with Apple products. And so I'll be honest with you, being home with my wife has just been such a cultural shock. It's wonderful. I have to be honest, not rushing to get to an airport.
No, definitely not.
That's great. And I live in Somerset, so we have quite a bit of ground actually. I really have felt for people that have been in inner cities or in any sort of apartment or whatever, stuck there. I don't know how they mentally would cope with that, especially with children. All our children are grown up.
Yeah.
So very nice to be home.
Yeah.
Strange, very strange.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be classified as high risk, I guess. So I have really been in lockdown.
Okay. Yeah. And what have been kind of your main priorities? What have you been doing during lockdown? What's taking your time?
Well, from day one, I knew that I had to have a regime, very strict regime, because I had a feeling it would be months, and it still is.
Yeah.
To all intents and purposes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even though we're now in the school holidays, it's just a continuation of that. So 3-4 months, whatever. So from day one, I decided it was going to be up, working on our project Sleuth It. I'm a musician, so having time to actually practice an instrument every single day. I've been able to pick up piano playing seriously, which is wonderful. So every single day, I decided it would have its time. And then, of course, this is a cottage built in 1668. It's pretty high maintenance, and all those things that have been waiting, so they got allocated a time. And between that, I can't believe where the 3-4 months has gone.
Yeah.
A strict regime on that, because clearly schools weren't going to have any third-party person going in. Obviously, schools have been open for those that had to have their students still going there. I presume it's the same in Scotland.
It is.
Quite a few of the schools that I work with are international schools.
Okay.
So, or independents, fee paying. So they have really worked hard. Some of them have worked 10, 12-hour days, the educators I know, to facilitate the on-learning platform because of just a huge amount of pressure and expectation from parents. So we've actually devised some distance packages as part of Sleuth It, so that they could play our games. We created a special version which didn't need iBeacons that they could play.
Okay.
So we switched on each episode centrally from our server, and they would refresh the app, and the next episode would arrive inside the app, and we created some sort of we basically created all the lessons like we normally do for Sleuth It. And then we were encouraging the students to use things like Shobi, where they'd be able to have a group chat, say, I found this piece of evidence, etc. So yeah, really, really busy, but good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've touched on your Sleuth It project there, and I suppose it might be a good time for those of us who are watching, or those people who are watching that aren't familiar with that package, just to touch on that for a little while and actually talk about Sleuth It. And I had the pleasure of chatting with you at Bet about it in January, and that was the first time I'd seen it, and we're really interested. But maybe just touch on Sleuth It a little bit and explain what that is.
Okay, so going back about 3 or 4 years, people aren't always aware. This is the long story, but I think it's worth doing because
Definitely.
Apple actually developed some Bluetooth technology called beacons. Actually got one on my desk. My desk is littered with the things. Okay, this little Bluetooth device. In fact, it was Dan Edwards, who is now works with Apple, who showed me one of these. We were at an event in Nice, name drop, but he just came in and he said, you are going to want to know what this is. And I went, okay, so what is it? You switch this on and it triggers stuff to appear in the iPad. End of story. That's as it. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
And it totally blew my mind because I realized you needed to be within 20, 30 feet of this thing.
Okay.
What I realized very quickly was that because it was location or proximity dependent, students could walk around with their iPads and stuff could happen. And what really got me excited was that the realization this literally triggers a table of contents in the iPad.
Okay.
We as the pedagogist decide what that table of contents will be: video, text, interactive widget. So the whole adventure game thing was what I could see, but also a science specific stand or something in the school. So I was working with some educators in Wales and they was just saying, look, we got the iPad, but our biggest challenge is literacy, reading. And everywhere I've gone, it's either the lack of interest in picking up a book outside of school.
Yeah.
That is the real pressure, or indeed English, because it's the largest second language worldwide. Many students are very good orally. You know, they're watching YouTube, they're doing all this, watching Netflix.
Yeah.
But when it comes to picking up one of these things, or engaging with text,
yeah.
So they said, can you get the kids excited about it? So basically we, my wife and I, we kind of came up with this idea of sort of Cluedo meets whatever scenario and had the beacons all over the school. So we were looking at the work of people like Tim Rylands. Tim Rylands was at Bet a lot. He was an amazing educator. He's no longer with us, but he was really into using the MIST games and gamification. Gamification is such a massive carrot for engagement. That if we put all of those elements together, we realized we had something that would engage enough long term. So we developed Sleuth It, originally Murder Inc. It was called Murder Inc., but we changed the name for some reason to Sleuth It, and realized we could develop a whole load of lesson materials and stuff to support the teacher. And basically we've created 11 games from age 6 to 16. So the latest big game is The Mystery of Shakespeare's Globe, which is based on 6 Shakespeare plays. So I switch one of these on, and you're at a square in Verona, and you're watching the Montagues and the Capulets kicking hell out of each other. Romeo and Juliet are there, and Juliet's the more mature one, and Romeo's taking the mickey out of Tybalt. And we wove into that sort of fictitious elements of a case. And we had to introduce elements that didn't exist in Shakespeare's time, like a newspaper, a weekly newspaper, so that we could drip feed plot elements, diaries, letters, etc. In the other games, we've got safes, lockers, combinations that you have to figure out through playing the adventure game to crack the case, avoiding violence, bloodshed, etc. So we developed 11 of these things, 11 of the games, which are available as collections of games. COVID has been good to us in a sense that we have had some ideas that we've been able to kick around for the last 3 months. The one I was telling you about before the call, we've got a group of kids called the Sherlock Club, 4 children and a big dog. Sound familiar? 4 children, dog, Famous 5, Goonies, Stranger Things. And we're able to weave in the elements that we know really attract students, like comics. The new series we're working on, we're reading a huge comic element where you've got to read the book, you've got to read the comic to help solve the game and play the game. So there's the long story about using iBeacons to trigger the stuff in the games, but the biggest element of it is engaging students to want to read, probably without even knowing that they're reading, because, I used to read Tintin books,
Yeah.
Asterix, Marvel comics, and it's valid. It's got narrative, it's got plot, it's got all those things.
It's that old story as a teacher that I used to try and find myself, getting to parents all the time. I don't care what they read as long as they're reading something. And that if you can get them to engage with literacy without realizing they're doing it, then absolutely I think you're onto a winner there. So yeah, it's definitely something worth looking at, and something that I think we need to look at again when we get back to school. But yeah, so that's kind of been keeping you busy during lockdown, just kind of fine tuning that and developing that further. In terms of schools that you've been working with, what would you say, Joe, were some of the main struggles that you've been aware of? Have you been aware of things that have really concerned teachers or students during lockdown?
Are you talking specifically COVID or tech in general?
Just during the last 3 months, during closure, what do you think? If you've been aware of anything that's been a particular struggle?
Yeah, well, there are sort of two problems. One is making sure that the system that's in use is effective and easy to do.
Yeah.
Which I've seen schools go from literally nothing, from a standing start, to being really active and actually doing it really well.
Yeah.
So the most important thing there was having a reseller partner that was able to get them into the right place as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, because of obviously people I know, so many parents just struggling with realizing how difficult and what's really involved in teaching. Getting stuck on a maths problem or not wanting to do it today or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to be the long-term effect. I think at one point I was thinking, well, hold on, 6 weeks break. How can that be that damaging? I know, of course, it's all around the exam period. So the biggest struggle was making sure that material was available. I did hear the same story of overload from a teacher and parent perspective. Literally, so many people jumped on a sort of bandwagon of realizing, hold on, here's a great way of engaging people. Sign up to our free whatever. Yeah, hoping they would get the longer term. Yeah. And I'm sure Zoom is probably loving it just as much as Amazon is. Yeah. But because of the panic to be seen, I think, to be providing learning.
Yeah.
So many, I think, just many homes just kind of went, "Wow, this is just crazy."
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're not a huge school, but we're certainly not a small school either. So we've got 3-4 entry, so we've got 18 classes in total, and we found it a real challenge to make sure that workload was consistent across year groups. So within a year group, we found the teachers were working really well to share tasks, preparation things. But you'd find that we had children who were working further down our primary school who were being loaded with, 6 times the work that our children at the top of the school were working on it. So it's trying to get that consistency across, families who've got children across year groups. And, it's very easy as a teacher to see all these lovely things and, oh yeah, let's do this and let's do that and let's share this and let's share that. So actually trying to get that structure in place of this is what we want you to do. And then there's these kind of high optimal activities that if you want to explore those, you can as well. But it didn't seem to matter how many times we told children or parents, just do what you want to do what suits you. There's no pressure to do everything. There was still that anxiety and feeling of, it's far too much and there's pressure. And I think what we were also aware of with other schools local to us was that we had always been led, were very strong with their technology provision. They had all the systems, but they weren't using them with students. So they had, a VLE, they had workflow solutions such as Shobi, but the children weren't used to using them in school. And therefore, when they went off to work from home, they were suddenly being thrown into Microsoft Teams and Shobi, and they hadn't had any experience of doing that in school. So it was really fascinating just to watch how even within Edinburgh, we've got obviously got a strong community of independent schools in Edinburgh. 25% of our, population of children are in the independent sector. But just to see how well our schools came together and actually hit ideas off each other. We've got a really good community of e-learning within our schools, and helped each other with different issues and things. And there wasn't that competition element that perhaps there would be at other times. So yeah, it was nice to see how that worked out. But certainly, making sure systems were in place and were strong, and not too complicated. Trying to really keep things straightforward and
How
sticking.
did you cope with document management? Because obviously there's a huge amount of information. So what platform were you using for that?
So we used a combination of, having said we tried to keep things simple, we used a combination of ways to communicate with different people. So in terms of a staff, we moved our staff onto Microsoft Teams. So we've historically had this shared area that sits on our network and grows and grows and grows, and has probably grown for 15, 20 years. And needs to just be removed actually one day. So we moved all of their working documents onto the cloud, into OneDrive and Teams. So they were very much working on that platform. We then used Shobi when working with students from primary 4 up to transitional secondary, because we were able to give them, they all took an iPad home for closure. And then with our youngest children who didn't have the one-to-one device, it was a case of sharing documents through our VLE. So we use Firefly as our VLE. And so all tasks were sent through Firefly, landed in parents' inboxes at 9:30 in student devices. But then we were able to, whilst actual tasks were listed through Firefly, so parents knew what was to be done each day or what was available each day, the slightly older children got their resources and their instructions through Shobi, because that's what they're used to working with. So it's kind of a combination of those two platforms, but they worked really nicely for us side by side. So if you were a parent of a child, say 7 or 8, you would get up in your app at 9:30 in the morning would be the tasks that were being released that day with instructions and resources. But then you'd be able to say to the child, who would also get that email, right, you go into Shobi, there's the assignment for today, and everything's there. And it was really a case of trying to make sure those instructions were really clear and really systematic. We didn't do live teaching in our primary school. We made the decision early on not to do that. We came under pressure for that a little bit because parents saw other schools doing it. But our motto was always that we'd start small, and if we felt the need, we could build up to some of that. But we felt that we didn't want to do it because, pupils, we didn't want them feeling they had to stick to a strict timetable, Monday to Friday. We wanted them to have the flexibility to access resources whenever they wanted, and also to be able to access resources multiple times. If you're struggling with, your literacy or your numeracy, and you've got to watch a live lesson and then follow up that task, and you've missed that lesson or you've missed that instruction. So it was a conscious decision not to do it, and I'm happy that we made that decision. It just meant that our staff are under great pressure to prepare really high quality resources and to make them available, in time. And Shobi then, of course, for the feedback element. And I think that's been one of our biggest wins is, we've had Shobi for about 6 years. And only now do I feel that we've made the most of the feedback solution. We've used it wonderfully for sharing resources and receiving content back from students. But I mean, I would have teachers who were still printing off things from Shobi to stick into jotters to mark. Drive me crazy. I had teachers asking me just before lockdown, it'd be great if Shobi had a button where you could download all the things that were in an assignment to print them out. So, well, why? So hopefully teachers will start to see that actually that's a valid form of feedback, and we don't need to be able to hand a full jotter with marking. And, if all your feedback's there, and I personally feel the feedback I've given during closure has been far superior to the feedback I've been given, in class recently. So it worked for us, and I think what our biggest win was that we didn't really change too much. We've always worked through Firefly and Shobi, and we were able to continue with that approach. I think for us that worked quite well.
There's a school in South Africa I work with, and I contacted them and just see how things going on. Yeah. And they said, we've been planning for this for the last 2 years. What? They've actually been doing a distance learning day a month,
right,
in preparation that they're a private school, so that if something happened that they would have to teach from school to home. Yep. So they just went straight into that, and it blew my mind. I said, wow, how did you see that coming? And the guy who, Richard Naggs, his name is, he's the IT guy, but always been very interested in pedagogy and following trends or whatever. And I thought, wow, that took some vision, didn't it?
Absolutely.
They were ready for it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I suppose it means you've got that day, day a month to, for staff training or whatever, but it means that you are comfortable with that approach and that possibility. Because I think there are certain teachers I've spoken to who work in schools, in a similar role to mine, and they've spoken about staff who genuinely thought this was going to be quite easy, and thought that this was going to be quite a comfortable time, and that they would just, send the resources through and children would get it. And I don't think they were quite prepared for the scale of what was actually coming. I naively thought that we'd be back before I genuinely thought we'd be back before the summer holidays, and that I'd see that class again. To have actually been kind of practicing for 2 years is really forward thinking, really bold. Really.
I thought that was quite amazing. But you already mentioned, will there be a bet 21? I think, I don't know. I think so. But the planning, I've got some training in the first week of September.
Yeah.
So we already talked about how's the distance learning going to happen in the hall. I've ordered one of those clear mask ones, the sort of Keir Starmer. I've seen a picture. I thought, wow, you can still see the guy's face and he's talking. That makes sense,
Yeah.
So the school is already now kind of thinking about, well, life's got to go on, and how do we do this? And you're going to be that. Nobody's allowed within 3 meters of you, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But my concern, and I know many educators in my position who travel into the schools, where we've been delivering through Zoom.
Yeah.
Have delivered some sessions through Zoom, and that works. One of the wonderful things about Zoom is breakout rooms.
Yes.
That's just fantastic. Being able to allocate groups, etc. So the return, I think schools, thinking, how are we going to go do that and have people coming into the school?
Yeah. And I don't know how we would do that. We're struggling at the moment. Our classrooms aren't huge. And I think the biggest difficulty we've got is that our corridors are quite narrow. So we're a, traditional old school building. And once we've got our children in the classrooms, I think we're quite comfortable, but it's actually getting them into the classrooms that we're having to spend a lot of time, thinking about, how do we've only got one access point into our site. So how do we get them on site? How do we get them into buildings? And the big thing for us is, I think we need to get the social distancing marker down to 1 meter or removed, but, for children. But, in our senior school, for example, we need to get down to 1 meter. And we don't know yet if or when that's going to happen. And we're back to school in 4 weeks.
Yes, you are. You're back earlier than us.
Yeah. So we're back on the 17th of August, which is a week earlier than we would normally be back. But schools in Scotland, local authority have been told to go back on the 11th of August, which is very early. So we've kind of felt under pressure to go back a little bit earlier than we would have done as well, just to kind of be seen to be helping our parents and doing as much as we can, which is quite right. But it means we've got 4 weeks, and we've kind of got plans laid out, and if this happens, we do this, and if this happens, we do that. So in terms of actually bringing other people onto site at the moment, I don't know how we would go about that. Yeah, it's quite a thought, and I think there's this assumption at the moment in Scotland that, I don't know what it's like down south, that we're getting back to normal and that everything's going to return to normal, and everything's going to, I don't see it, and I hope that we do go back to normal as we can, but there are also elements that I don't want to go back to. I don't want teachers to fall back into the old habits they had before. I want them to have learned from this period of closure, and they've done so much learning and developing in terms of their use of technology, and even their confidence with technology and their confidence to deliver instruction through video. For me to have asked some of our teachers to film themselves for a 6-7 minute video of instruction, they would have thrown the iPad back at me 6 months ago. But now it's just, and it's quite funny watching these videos. I was having a look through our Shobi rooms and our Firefly and Microsoft Stream and things, and the videos from end of March, April compared to the videos end of July, and the hair's all changed, and we're not quite concerned about the angles, and so yeah, there are certainly things I want to keep from lockdown, but I don't know how we go back to ensuring that. Do
you think though they would? Do you think they would go back to printing out stuff and sticking it in a jotter when having experienced actually distributing electronic documents, markup? One of the biggest things with Shobi is being able to record audio feedback.
Yep.
Just as audio feedback or in context on the document. That always was a mind-blowing thing for me to go, this sentence, even if you're a language teacher, I want to hear you pronounce that. So record yourself saying these sentences, and then I'll have a listen, and then I'll give you feedback. Do you think they would just return having had that?
I really hope not. And I don't think they could justify going back to how they've done things before. I don't think there's any sensible reason for them going back. It's more how they deliver content. We've got a lot of teachers who really like standing in front of their Promethean boards and delivering content, or having children come up. And the battle I always have is, I need my smart board, I need my Promethean board, because they need to be able to move things, they need to be able to interact with the board, they need to be able to interact with the content. Saying, but they've each got an iPad in there, and absolutely there's a time for that and a place for that, absolutely. They've all got a device that they can interact, rather than watching one student interacting with the device at a time. So I hope that they start to see the possibilities of this device and actually how it can be used to engage the whole class.
I worked with a school with 1,800 iPads, and there was the revision thing, the revision period for the marks for the exams.
Yep.
And I went into this photocopying room. I needed something, and there were stacks of papers. And I said, "What is all this?" And he said, "It's all of the past papers for these subjects, and it was all the sciences, and it was maths."
Right.
And I said, You've had iPads for 4 or 5 years now. Surely you're going to PDF. There's no way every student is going to read every page of every photocopy. And the bill for this thing was hundreds of thousands, not tens.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I said, for a start, we don't need this room. And secondly, you can access any page. You can use search facilities. Just use Acrobat if you don't want to buy anything else with your finger. And then you've got all of that. Yeah. So I would have hoped that this situation would cause an end to that. I mean, I'm amazed at the photocopying budgets of some schools still.
Absolutely.
That I go in and visit.
It's quite scary. And, even though we've had Shobi for 6 years now, it is still quite alarming how often you see the queue in the photocopying room and the amount we're spending on leasing these photocopiers, and even during lockdown, I picked up on an email that the ink needed replacing on the photocopier. I think, how can the photocopier need new ink when we've been closed for 3 months? But it's the accounts department, there's still departments in obviously working. So hopefully it will be quite obvious that there are changes that will be beneficial and long-term need to just stick in place. And I think that's why, I've managed to fight my way out of having a class this year. So I'm not going back to a class in September.
Right.
So I'm going to be out of class full time across both our primary school and our secondary school, and doing a lot of coaching. And
as a sort of IT pedagogical support
yes,
specialist or something.
yeah.
Okay, that's very, very forward thinking of the school.
Yeah. So I mean, I've had that role kind of in a job share while still teaching for the last 6 years. Anna, who you've met, is head of IT, and I'm going to be kind of the e-learning person. So the two of us together, I think, will be a really exciting team to work across both sites. And I think it's particularly important this year, going back and seeing the opportunity to really catch what we've achieved over the last 3 months and try and develop that. But yeah, I think it'll just be really exciting to see how staff come back and what they hold on to and what they look forward to sustaining. What we have, of course, found is that we replaced our staff devices 2 years ago, and for some unbeknown reason, they were given a 32 gig iPad, which for some of our staff was absolutely fine. They've coped really well with a 32 gig iPad, but they've spent the last 3 months filming and creating and editing, and those devices, I think, have struggled slightly, even with their OneDrive and their everything else, cloud solutions. So I almost kind of hope that they're going to come back demanding more powerful devices, and because they've seen the possibility and what they can do. We don't have the money to buy them.
Are they using Apple Pencils, by the way? Were they Apple Pencil devices?
So yeah, so the iPads they've got at the moment are 6th gen. So what we've given them is we gave them Logitech crayons. Okay. And we did that for a couple of reasons. Obviously the price, being at the time, significantly cheaper, but also just the durability of them in a classroom, and also the fact that they weren't paired to a specific device. So I could take my Logitech crayon and go around any device in the classroom and edit and adjust. And then we put Apple Pencils into certain departments. So the art department, we put Apple Pencils into for the shading and the tone work. And then secondary staff, we have got some Apple Pencils, but we've also started rolling out Lenovo pencils. I don't know if you've come across those. They're about £30 each, and they've been really successful. So we don't have many Apple Pencils out there. The one downside that I've got to the crayons are the nibs are quite chunky, and actually to get that really refined detail, an Apple Pencil probably would suit them slightly better. But that's what we've done, and I think giving them that, for Shobi marking, for example, they really needed that tool to make it super fast and super easy.
Do your teachers all use? My favorite tool was quick marking. Was one of two things. Quick marking and Shobi is just insane. Jumping between students quickly. Do you use the groups in Shobi much to create that chat scenario? You do. Okay.
So
it's a great tool.
Only recently have I found great use for that. I had a class teacher who was wanting to do some collaboration work, some collaborative work, and wanted their children to be able to communicate and collaborate. So we tried groups with that. The biggest win I've found with groups recently is since Shobi rolled out their video chat software. So to be able to set up groups rather than it having to be whole class-wide group chat, that's become quite useful. So I think the video chat feature will make groups more critical again, because I think it probably has been a very underused tool in Shobi. But yeah, so we do bits of it, but I think it's amazing how many, it sits there at the bottom of your screen, but it's amazing how many teachers don't know it's there, don't know what it is. And the same with quick marking. It doesn't seem to matter how often I show teachers quick marking. It still seems to blow their mind every time I show it. But yeah, no, I mean, we couldn't have done lockdown without Shobi. We really couldn't have done. Just being able to, create content, create lessons of work, schedule them, have them release automatically, know that that's done. It's been a huge, huge saving for us in terms of stress and workload and time. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep you all day, Joe. I could talk to you easily all day. But I suppose kind of to start wrapping things up, thinking long term, what do you think? I mean, we've kind of touched on it already, but what is the biggest takeaway? What is going to be the long-lasting result of lockdown, positive or negative, or maybe both?
I think it's all positive in that even for experienced users of IT, such as you and I, it makes you reappraise the way you work. For me, I've realized that a certain degree of what I do, even sort of delivering Sleuth It, we deliver Sleuth It taster sessions, for example, and I would trek however many miles to do that. Well, I've had to find a way of doing that without the beacons, which are a big thing for us, obviously, the trigger content. But it's not about the beacons. It's about the learning experience and how could I deliver that from wherever I am. So we've delivered 2 sessions last month, 2 different schools in the UAE. And amazingly, they bought Sleuth It packages at the end of that training session. I was like, it works. I don't need to be physically in the room. So for me, the biggest takeaway has been learning again to think and rethink, how can I do it better? How can I be more efficient? So we were talking about, will there be a return? I'm not sure what the return will be, but certainly I can't return to the same way of doing things. There's no need to. There is a better way, and maybe I need to think of just better ways of doing things. Whereas before, you were caught up in the maelstrom of life. So you just do, don't you? Day to day, day to day, day to day. So that making you rethink, that's definitely going to happen. Actually, I did mean, and it's a shameless plug, but it's not for something for people to buy. I'm pretty certain it's free. I've been working with Tom Abel Green Academia, and we are releasing end of August, September, a new magazine. Called Garageband in the Classroom. Still the working title, and it's aimed at so many of us go, wow, Garageband, it is amazing. We know it is. iPad, iOS, and Mac. But still, a lot of non-music specialists kind of shy away from it because they're not music specialists, and then secondary teachers and whatever. Also, a lot of secondary teachers look at Garageband, and I know this from my own experience because they've told me they think it's a toy. But I did a workshop in Glasgow, Christmas before last. 30 teachers, 30 specialist music teachers turned up on their own time and realized that it was such a powerful tool. Anyway, the magazine covers primary, non-music specialists, music specialists, and higher exam level projects every month. So yeah, you'll be able to pick it up, and I'll send you the details to share with the teacher or anybody watching this. Contact me. But issue 1 will be out definitely September the 1st, and it's going to come out monthly.
Fantastic.
And it's just to encourage people to use GarageBand in a structured way. It will teach you how to use GarageBand, just because it is one of the best pieces of software I've ever used in my life. It really levels the playing field for anybody to want to make music, and obviously music is my biggest passion, but that's what I'm working on
that's
right now.
Big thing. I mean, GarageBand is the one app I have never quite got my head around, and I think it's because of exactly that. I'm not a music specialist. I don't understand the fine details of it, but I seem to find myself going round in circles between making, I never seem to find myself at an end point. So it is something I've been meaning to get into over the summer break, because there's certainly, even for your literacy, there's so many opportunities. It's not just for music content, but it's something I need to be better at. So I look forward to that magazine, definitely. Well, Joe, that's been an absolute pleasure, and absolutely fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for giving me some time today. I hope we get to meet again soon, face to face, rather than over a screen. I don't know if that will be at Bet or something else
First
soon.
opportunity I get, Edinburgh is just
Yes,
a wonderful,
well,
wonderful city. So I'm going to come up.
definitely.
You're just coming out of lockdown, I think, really, from what I've seen.
Yeah, so
You're
things
about
have,
2-3 weeks behind us. So
yeah, I mean, things have really eased down, but I mean, we're still having to wear face masks in shops and socially
we are the same.
distant,
Yeah.
2 meters. A lot of restaurants have, I've been able to get into a couple of restaurants this week, sitting outside, but it's a big thing getting back out there and feeling comfortable. And I mean, I'm in a top floor flat here in Edinburgh, and don't get me wrong, there are much worse places I could spend lockdown, but it's been a struggle, being inside for 3 months, 4 months, and my family are all in Edinburgh, but we've had to be really careful. My father comes under the umbrella of high risk, so we've had to be really careful with our bubble and keeping things safe. But things have certainly opened up in the last couple of weeks, and people are starting to relax a little bit. But just got to be careful and stay safe, and because the last thing we want is to find ourselves back in school in September and then having to go back into lockdown again. Because if that happens,
well, it's happened in so many countries, hasn't it? The second wave and then closing the schools again. But thank you so much for asking me to just rant at you and talk about what I'm doing. It's really great to catch up. Thank you.
No, it's always nice, Joe, and I'm sure people will see this and really take a lot from your conversation, as they always do. If people want to reach out and get in touch with you or find out more about Sleuth It, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would do either Joe Moretti, all lowercase, 1R, ETTI, at mac.com, or jmoretti@sleuthit.com.
Perfect.
And if they just want to have a Zoom chat and talk about it, or even just, it'd be lovely to hear from anybody who wants to follow up on this conversation. But I do look forward to visiting you and Anna in Edinburgh.
Definitely.
Very, very shortly.
Yeah. Well, there's always a room. There's always a room for you here in Edinburgh, and we're really looking forward to doing some quite exciting things next year. So it'd be great to have a chat with you about that, and work together again. Anyway, thanks a lot, Joe. I've really enjoyed that.
Pleasure. Take care.